Welcome into a brand new edition of the 06010, the ESPN Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Feuz. A little different location today. We are with the one and only Stephania Bell, ESPN senior writer and injury analyst. Stephania, we have a great podcast planned ahead, but we're going to start it off with some breaking news. ESPN is excited to announce your new multi-year extension with ESPN. When you hear that, how grateful and what is your first thought that comes to mind?
Well, gratitude is first. I mean, I am so fortunate to be here this many years later after starting on what was, I think, a 6-month trial contract when I came in because of fantasy football. And, just every renewal, I'm grateful for the opportunity to keep developing and working in different areas than I maybe previously have. I mean, how many people are lucky enough to have a job where the challenges evolve and continue to grow as you stay in the job? People ask me what it's like to work at ESPN, and I say no 2 days are ever the same, and I love that.
And you've been with the company since 2007. So
I have.
How have you seen your role evolve from 2007 to this year?
It's interesting because, as I said, fantasy football is really what brought me here. I played fantasy football. For people who don't know, I'm a physical therapist by training, and I worked in the area of sports medicine for close to 20 years before I came here, whether it was clinical practice or teaching. But I also played fantasy football, and people would come to me with injury questions all the time, and that's what got me to think, there might be something to this. We all know information is currency. We work in that business, but I started that currency in my fantasy football league, and just felt like there was a broader audience, and I saw the opportunity for growth in fantasy football. And let me tell you, it has grown a ton since 2007. But even for a couple of years before that, I started dabbling in writing. I always felt like explaining injuries in the context of what was important for people who played fantasy football would evolve, because injuries, even though we don't love them, they are a huge part of sports. They're a part of every single sport that we touch. And people always want to know, they care, they come invested in the players that they follow. They want to know, how long is this person going to be out? What's it going to take for them to get back? And in physical therapy, when somebody walks through your door and maybe plays a sport or has a job that you're not familiar with, it's on you to learn about that and figure out what are the functional demands that patient has to get back to. And I treat my job here the same. I have to learn enough about the sport, if it's not a sport I'm as familiar with, to understand what they need to get back to. And then that's how I provide the analysis. So it really has grown from just fantasy football to this multitude of wherever the injuries are, I follow them.
I would say at times injuries can be very complicated in how you communicate them to the fans. How do you break it down to where a fan might be able to understand a complicated injury?
Well, I'm a sports fan, first and foremost, always have been. So I think, what is it that I would want to know as a fan? And I also used to teach. So when I was teaching, I had to learn how to break things down for students who were very early in the process of going to physical therapy school. I also taught in fellowship programs where you had to explain things at a higher level. So understanding the nuances of taking something complicated and breaking it down so that it's easy to understand has been part of my craft that I've had to work at even when I was treating patients. And I think the fact that I'm a sports fan as well, and so I'm always asking those same questions of myself, helps me prepare for what I think the audience wants to hear.
One of the things that's remarkable to me is, yes, mainly football, but also just how much you have to pay attention to other sports as well, because sometimes you'll appear on NBA Today or you're constantly on SportsCenter, or if an injury happens in Major League Baseball, you have to be well-versed around all the leagues. So how do you, I know you mentioned you're a sports fan, but how do you stay up on every sport?
It's hard. Luckily, I work for this network that covers so many sports and has great reporters who are covering things from all angles. And in reality, that is how I learn quite a bit. I draw on my resources. We have such excellent reporters in every area that if there's something that I'm really curious about from the medical physical therapy analyst standpoint, I might reach out to the reporter who's covering that team and ask them a few questions about a particular player, what's been going on, or things that they've seen, and it does help provide the analysis. I mean, all I have to do is look at our highlights, and our news updates to know what the big injuries are. And then I'll dive into the things where I think that we need some analysis.
What does your week look like? Because that's what's most fascinating to me.
I never know.
When do you prepare? How do you get ready for a Sunday, for example?
It's interesting because I talk about my year being split into 2 semesters. There's the semester that football is on the air. And then there's the semester that football is not on the air because I have such a heavy investment in football. So my schedule during that time looks pretty similar week to week in that my heavy days for on-air work is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. This year. And so I'm looking at prepping going into the football weekend, gathering information, being ready for our show on Sunday, and then talking about the aftermath of the weekend on Monday and Tuesday. And the next few days are really heavily spent in research. We have a new virtual reality technology that we debuted just a week and a half ago. And so it's learning and practicing that and then integrating that with injury information, but also keeping my attention on the injuries that are happening in other sports. And then my off semester is spent I still go to medical conferences. I'm doing sports medicine related things, research projects, or depending on the nature of the sport, covering them on site or working on features, whatever it is, the other projects I've got going on.
The virtual reality thing is unbelievable. I saw that and I just was blown away by how you were able to break down an injury and walk fans through and, again, just educate fans on what's happening. But that also goes back to your involvement here with the company since 2007. So how do you balance the knowledge that you have, but also new technology at the same time?
Listen, I'm not a gamer. So putting on an Oculus for the first time, I was like, I was going to say a fish out of water, but literally felt like I had to get sea legs getting used to wearing a headset and being in that virtual reality space. There was a big learning curve there just to learn how to navigate the joysticks. And when you put your hands in front of you and it feels like something out of the future because you're seeing these fake hands and the beams that come out of it to point to things. So there's a learning curve for the technology, but I've always felt that illustration is really helpful when it comes to medicine. I can say words, they're often big, and people don't know, what is that ligament or where is that bone located? When you can put something out there that is a representation, and in virtual reality, you have the ability to manipulate it all in 3 dimensions, which is a game changer. And I think we saw that with the Joe Burrow segment we did with the turf toe. People said, I've never really known where that was. I didn't know what that injury was. But once you see it, your brain goes, oh, aha, I've got that. So I'm still learning. I'm still learning on how to work with the system. You can ask the people who are patient enough to teach me how that's going. But whenever I have something that I think is going to help make it more interesting for the fan or easier for them to understand what I'm trying to convey, I'm all for it.
So did you rehearse going into that segment beforehand or how much did you have to practice using the VR headset?
We were working on this technology for multiple months. I would say 8 months or so before it came to air. As far as a particular segment, once we knew that the injury happened and that we were going to be using it, the next day I made a notes of all the things that I would want to be able to say and kind of marked out like you would if you were doing a play. This is how it's going to be. I'm going to walk in here. I'm going to do this. You think it through in your mind because there's a physical component to carrying out that VR. And then in the studio, the trick is you're limited in terms of studio time because it takes a lot of people to produce a segment like that. It's not just one person behind the camera. We've got a director. We've got the folks who are loading the VR, the camera operators. It's really a village. And then you have to try and cut a segment that will work in 90 seconds to 2 minutes and hope that you can get it in just a couple of takes.
Stephania, before we get to my favorite part of any interview, the Fast Five rounds, I do have to ask, you were on my podcast when I was in high school, close to 10 years ago.
Look at you.
So it's great to finally.
Now you're my colleague.
I know, and it's great to have you back on the podcast in a way. But if a college student or a high school student walked up to you today and asked you for career advice on how to carve their own way in sports media, or maybe someone in medical school, what kind of advice would you give to them?
It's hard because people often ask me, what did you do? How did you get here? And I say, you don't want to take that route. It was very nonlinear and it was really just trial and error. But number one, I was following something I was passionate about. I love sports. I love medicine. I always love putting them together. So essentially, that's all I've really done. But I think also just being persistent, people did not believe me that there would be a space to talk about injuries related to fantasy football. You can imagine how that sounded when I first started throwing that out into the ether. And now we see there are a lot of people out there who are talking about injuries related to sports. And so I feel very good about that. And I think that's the key. Follow what you're passionate about.
All right. Feuz Fast Five. It's my favorite part of any interview I do. Are you ready?
I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't think I have a choice.
All right. Well, here we go. Number one, intentional optimism. ESPN's documentary. We had a showing at the local drive-in right near the Bristol ESPN campus. You were there.
I was.
What was that night like for you?
It was emotional. I got to meet the people who made the film, and watching the films, so many of the people who actually helped me when I first came here were in that film, the Bob Lees and the Chris Bermans of the world. And just hearing the history of how ESPN went from an idea to coming to be, and knowing that there were some scary moments for them where they didn't know if it was going to get off the ground, but just seeing the very beginnings when it was a concept. And I love the idea of people who have an idea that maybe nobody else believes in, and then they make it happen, make it a reality. It was really well done. And I got a little emotional. I'm not going to lie, watching it, because it was pretty special.
What was the most emotional part?
I think seeing that not enough people recognize, I don't believe, how hard it was for them to actually get this off the ground. And to me, what was emotional was the way this group of people, this core group, banded together and were doing when the building wasn't even completely built, and got that first night on the air because they believed in something.
We are in the Fantasy Focus football studio.
We are.
How much fun is hosting this podcast?
Listen, it never gets old telling people that you talk about fake football for a living and that we actually have made a career out of it. And even when I'm tired, you and I have talked about the long hours sometimes in terms of preparation. I remind myself that I get to talk about football for a living, and fantasy football at that. So to see how it's grown in terms of having our own graphics and our own studio and a fan base without which we couldn't do any of this. We have very loyal listeners. We've taken the show on the road. We've done live shows. I mean, this is all because of ESPN really deserves a lot of credit here in believing in fantasy football and believing in the growth of it. And the fact that it continues to grow year over year is a tribute to all the people who work on it here.
One football stadium you haven't been to yet that you would love to get to?
Oh my gosh. There aren't many that I haven't been to, but you know what I haven't been to that I want is the new Bills Stadium, because that is a fan base that is crazy passionate. But here's when I want to go. September. Like
you don't want to be
I'm
there
a California
in January.
girl. I want to go and I want to see the Buffalo, the Bills Mafia in action on a game day when the weather's still good. And that new stadium looks amazing. So I can't wait to get to it.
One thing that you haven't done yet at ESPN that you would love to?
College game day.
What a great atmosphere that is.
I know. I've been to it.
Yeah.
I want to get something on it. That's
awesome.
it. We're
awesome.
close.
Yes.
We're close.
And then the last one for you, obviously you do host a podcast, but if you could host a podcast with anyone in your phone contact, who are you choosing?
Oh my gosh. I got some good contacts, That's a tough one. Oh, you're making this hard. Well, I would like to host a podcast with my favorite, the guy who was my idol growing up, football player, Ronnie Lott.
Oh.
So I wanted to be a safety, full disclosure. Everybody thinks they want to be the quarterback and wide receiver. I wanted to be the one who dealt out the punishment. So I wanted to be a safety. Grew up 49er fan, grew up with Ronnie Lott. And, I've worked with Jerry Rice now. I've worked with Steve Young. I've worked with so many of our former 49ers. And I've had a chance to spend time with Brock Purdy. So I've got the new ones. But Ronnie Lott, I really don't know. And I would love to have a podcast with Ronnie Lott.
Well, Stephania, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for your time today. And again, congratulations on your new deal. Again, keep up the great work. I love always reading and learning, especially from everything you do. So thank you.
Well, you touch my heart, because when people say they've learned something by something I've done, that's my favorite.
Thanks so much.